Welcome to the #1 show and the source of truth for all things MedTech. Here, we reveal the secrets and stories behind the investments, science, and commercialization of the MedTech industry. Every week, we'll take you on a wild ride with the biggest names in the game, from entrepreneurs and investors who are shaking up the market to healthcare providers who are revolutionizing the way we think and practice medicine. So hold on tight and get ready for a journey like no other. This is the State of MedTech. Guys, what's going on, and welcome back to the show. So this episode is actually from a event that I was asked to speak at, which is at Dreamforce. That's Salesforce's annual meeting. If you want to get an idea of how much money that company makes, their annual event, which, Dreamforce, aside from just an unbelievable setup in the Moscone Center and everything, Salesforce actually rented out the Chase Center, which is where the Golden State Warriors play, and the conference entertainment was the Foo Fighters. So yeah, there's a lot of money at this conference. But anyways, my sponsor, Clary, put on this amazing revenue summit. So Clary is a revenue intelligence platform. So they provide a platform for commercial intelligence. More specifically, if you have a Salesforce CRM, you're going to want to use Clary because essentially it's going to help your reps automate their data going into Clary, which makes it very easy. That way you're able to capture actionable insights throughout the sales cycle. But then their AI is able to pull from that data and give you more predictable revenue in terms of what deals are at risk, what deals should you focus on. Honestly, if you're a company, whether you're a startup or a large company, and if you have Salesforce, you really should be using Clary. If you want more information, check the show notes below and click that link, or go to clary.com, get a demo with them. So anyways, in the summit, we invited Daniel Hawkins, who is a just world-renowned expert and leader when it comes to medical sales excellence. He was an early employee at Intuitive, I think employee number 6, founded Shockwave, among many other companies, and then most recently is the founder and CEO of Avail Med Systems. And Avail essentially makes the best clinical specialists and reps available at any time, any place for all hospitals and cases using their hardware and software, which essentially allows the rep to be in the room virtually. And so in this session, we're joined by Coleman, who's the CMO over at Clary, and we talk about the history of medical sales, why it is what it is, and how do we elevate it using digital solutions. It's a great session. I really enjoyed it. And of course, Daniel and I, we always have a great time together when we talk about these kind of topics. So before we jump into the episode, one other sponsor I want to plug is my partnership with Alpha Sophia. Whether you're a large company launching a product or a small company that's just trying to find early adopters, the most important thing is finding the right adopter for your technology. When it comes to commercial intelligence and sales enabling technologies, having the right database to show you which doctors are the ones that you want to pursue in terms of procedure volume, CPT codes, societies, etc. It's really important. The problem is twofold. Number one, they're really, really expensive. They cost like $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year, and they're really clunky. Like, you can't just buy one of these databases and then give it to your sales rep to use. The sales team usually ends up not using it, so usually it's marketing spending time playing around with these databases. Well, Alpha Sophia's platform is not only very intuitive and easy to use, which is what I love. They pull in a lot of data on procedure volume, societies a surgeon might be a part of, so that way you can really narrow down who you should go after. They also bring in things like social media handles. So for me, driving adoption using social media is a big deal. So I use it to see which physicians have a Twitter handle, LinkedIn, etc. Probably the bigger part of this is that they're really made to make it easier for startups and founders to use, because they cost $300 a month. That is it. And you have the best quality commercial intelligence platform. that gives you all these insights. So for the audience, you can get a free, not one, not two, but 3 free reports and searches on Alpha Sophia. So all you got to do is go to their website, alphasophia.com/Omar. That's ALPHASOPHIA.com/Omar. And whether you're a junior rep, a VP, a founder, so it doesn't matter, you get those reports. And they're a really great team. Part of this is, of course, they demo the technology to you to see if that you're going to be a good use for it. But the other side of it is that you get free searches, and they don't do any pressure selling on anybody or hard selling. They're really fantastic. So go check that out. So that being said, let's get on to our episode with Daniel Hawkins and Kyle Coleman on the digital sales maturity model and how do we elevate medical sales as a whole. Enjoy.
Main challenges facing sellers in these HCLS industries today. Let's start with you, Daniel. I know you could talk about this for
I could
hours.
go on for a while here, but let me categorize my expertise and the framing for how I'll respond to all these questions. Yep. I'm a medical device guy, which means it's procedures in rooms. That means it's widgets that are used once and thrown away or implanted and they're with the patient for life. The main challenge in that over my career over the last 30 years, the number of hospitals has stayed roughly the same, but the number of corporations running the hospitals has gone up massively. So what used to be individual hospitals are now called IDNs, or integrated delivery networks. There's a challenge with that, because not only as a seller are you selling Dr. Jones or Dr. Smith and responding to his or her preferences, then you have to go up the chain to what's called the value add committee. So you have to sell into that to make sure that your product has the right cost benefit for a procedure. And oh, by the way, it either reduces cost in a demonstrable way or increases revenue in a demonstrable way, or the two. Most recently, it needs to be both.
Yep.
Not all the time, but very often. Very, very challenging. The last place you can break that code is if you have a technology that is so massively advanced that they actually use it to change patient flows. That's what we did at Intuitive Surgical.
Right.
The robot, I set the price, $2.1 million, very first unit ever sold. We moved patient volume with that technology. So it became a FOMO. I need one, no, I need one, and it just went rampant that way. So the number of hospitals has again stayed about the same. Now IDNs are controlling large volumes of hospitals. In that same time period, the number of ambulatory surgery centers has gone from something like 1,000 to something like 12,000.
Whoa.
So what does that mean for a sales force? 60% of a sales force's time in this industry is spent driving. Mm-hmm. So they're going to and from procedures. And let me give you a sales day for a moment. If you're in orthopedics, you're probably up at 5:30, 5:45 in the morning. You check your email and you find out the procedures you had scheduled at 9 o'clock are moved to 9:30 or 10, but there's 2 emergent ones that are at 6:45. You hop in your car, grab your trays from the local location that they're sterilized, throw them in the back of your car, run to the ambulatory surgery center and do a case, and you got a hot shot to another procedure somewhere else, but you find out the second case in the first location was delayed and now you can't get to the second one. That's life in medtech sales. It's that wild, right? Now, here's the problem with that. With something like 12,000 ambulatory surgery centers, about 5,500 hospitals, during that time period, the number of people in the field has not increased a corresponding ratio. So each person now has more facilities they need to cover. Well, that's kind of a problem if you have the conflict I just described.
Right.
Here's another thing that's terribly, terribly important. Commission-based sales generate most of the revenue most of the compensation. Commission does. If you're in a hospital selling a knee, by way of example, it's $4,000 at a hospital. Same part number in an ambulatory surgery center down the street, $2,200, $2,400, something like that. Exact same part number. Made worse by the fact that it's the same doc in both locations. So it's not like there's price transparency issues you have to deal with. Mm-hmm. So what are you going to do? You're going to service the hospital, right? But that doc's going to get annoyed if you don't go to the ASC. So now you got to go to the ASC, and you've got to drive. It's lower procedure volume in the ASC relative to the hospital. It's lower revenue per procedure and fewer procedures, but you're wasting the time.
Yep.
Challenges are logistical. Challenges are keeping up with sites of service. challenges are the process from hello to I'm using this regularly for a new product. All of that is a heavy, heavy burden on a field team that literally keeps the population alive and well. Quite literally.
Yeah.
And making no mistake, salespeople in the medical device industry, wildly passionate about what they do, incredibly valuable to the industry, overly burdened.
So those logistical problems are serious headaches.
Logistical problems are a serious headache. I will say the variability of patient need and device selection and inventory and tracking, it's just all a heavy burden on a group of men and women that dedicate their life every day to making sure that your procedures go well. And just to ground set a little bit here, if you were to go in for a knee procedure today at 4 o'clock, there's a 90% chance there's a sales rep in the room. Mm-hmm. It feels a little weird to most people. I'm seeing some eyebrows go up. Why are they in the room? Not because the doc doesn't know how to implant a knee, but because they might be using one of 10 knees from the company. I'm going to pretend for a moment, say it's J&J DePuy. They might be using one of 10 knees from DePuy, but they're regularly used to using Stryker knees. Each one of those knees comes with racks of instruments because everybody's body's a little different and all of the instruments are variable based on what's needed for that patient. So they could be pulling 2 from tray 19 and 7 from tray 48. And so all these equipment comes in. The rep knows all of that to make sure that the doc has the right equipment to get something done. That's just orthopedics. That's one of the more complicated ones. It's across the entire industry, but I'm using that illustratively.
Yeah, useful.
And because of that, the reps have a lot of logistical challenges, and there's a lot they need to care for.
Let's talk, Omar, about some of the tech challenges.
Sure.
Because magnifying or multiplying those logistical issues are the tech or tooling or lack thereof that sales teams don't have that makes life doubly, triply complicated. Talk to us about what you see there from a digital sales maturity standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like a lot of this goes back to access both to sell a new product, but also access to supporting the account. For SaaS, you call it customer success. For us, we usually call it clinical. Right, and this is where one area that Daniel's company Avail focuses on. Right, when you have a lack of access, right, the sales reps have more time, but they also don't know how to get their job done.
Yeah.
Not only the logistical challenges, let's say, with servicing account, but more specifically getting deals into pipeline, right? And because we've had these scaled up complexities, not only in terms of the deal, because it used to be back in the day, 20, 30 years ago, my father was a surgeon. I used to just walk into the hospital, go back to the OR and say, hey, I'm here to hang out with Dr. Khateeb. Nobody asked me who I was. Yeah, sure, just grab some scrubs. And I just walk back 13 years old, oversized scrubs.
Not happening.
Yeah, not happening today. Not happening today, exactly.
Walking backwards.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, seriously. And so when it comes to the sale, it used to be an event, right? You go, you talk to the doctor. That's why they call it carrying the bag. You show up, you go to the doctor's lounge, hang out. Doctor comes out and says, hey, doc, I noticed you have 3 of these procedures, and what a coincidence. I got 3 of these things that are just for that procedure. Doc goes and does it, and then hospital gets billed, and that's it. But now, those days are gone. It's so much more complicated. Even when the doctor says, I want to use this product, there's supply chain, there's procurement, there's all these committees, not to mention the fact that, so Daniel mentioned that you have these IDNs and corporations who are watching everything. And so now that you've introduced all this complexity to the deal, right? We all know how complex it is to sell these days. You need more complicated more sophisticated processes to manage these things, right? However, I hate to say it, and this is part of the reason why I started my company, the reason why that Daniel's up on this stage is that our sales processes and how we run revenue in the industry has not changed. There are, and I will mention them, Fortune 500 companies that are multiple billion-dollar market caps that are still running these processes through spreadsheets, right? With very little quality controls on it, And as a rep, think of it like this. In the SaaS world, what's nice is that you have the sales process broken up. You have SDRs for outreach. You have the AEs. You have a sales engineer. For medical devices, that same person that Daniel just described, who's in cases doing these things, they're also required to prospect, do demos, find new business, all these things. And so that leaves very little time to actually get information and data into a CRM if one exists. Let's just say it's a spreadsheet. And so if a day goes by, whatever, a lot of reps, they just say, hey, I'm going to update this stuff by the end of the week. By the end of the week, that number one may have turned into a 1.5 or something else. And this compounds over time. And then sales leaders and marketing leaders end up fighting every single quarter because everybody's freaking out saying, we got to get numbers to the boards because what's our revenue going to be like this quarter? What can we predict for pipeline next week versus next year versus et cetera? And then you get the sales team together. Everybody's reporting the weather. It's very subjective based. And that's kind of the way the industry is right now.
Yep. So we have sellers spending 60% of their time traveling, not selling. We have logistical issues that are requiring or creating more headaches. And then we have data issues or the lack of data capture that are slowing teams down. What do you solve first? How do you approach this? If you're a sales leader at one of these companies, what do you do?
There's some whack-a-mole going on.
Can I jump in on this?
Yeah,
I think the first thing, and again, this is why like I really appreciate what Avail's doing. I've never worked for Avail. I wish that Avail existed when I was in the industry, right? But I think the first thing is like, how do you make the cases and the reps accessible to the hospital and the people they need to help and also influence at any time during the day? Because back when I was, head of marketing, it was a whole field day to figure out how do we get a rep in a room versus, let's say, R&D needs to go, et cetera. So I think that's the one thing on the clinical success side, but also on the seller side, and again, I'm going to say some things that are shocking to people, but in our industry, it's normal. It was very normal, and it still happens today, that if you're a rep and you're like, I got to sell to the chair of cardiothoracic surgery, I'm going to pretend that I'm going to hang out in this bathroom and wash my hands like 50 times until I know for a fact that his case is going to end at this time. They're going to walk in and I'll just be like, what a coincidence, right? So we can't do that anymore because the hospitals are not allowing it. So how do we make those sellers able to scale their sales processes remotely? And then on the other side is the clinical success side or customer success. How do we scale that ability so that a rep can be in a room no matter what? Because not everybody works in San Francisco. Some of these cases are in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
And accounts are like an hour, 2 hours apart. I have a Instagram channel called All Hail Medical Sales, and the reps send me videos and everything. Sometimes it's very common for a rep where in the morning they're in, let's say, since we're in the Bay Area, they're in San Francisco, and in the afternoon they got to be in San Jose, maybe Santa Cruz to cover something, and they don't know what time they're going to get home. So those are the big complexities that we have.
How about you, Dan?
So I'm remembering a statistic that I can't attribute to the company that provided to me that wouldn't be appropriate. But they did a review of multiple divisions in the U.S., forgetting international for just a moment. They came back and told us that 11% of a sales rep's time is spent selling.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yep.
Just let that number just settle in for you. 11%. 60% in the car,
Yep.
11% selling. You got a whopping 71. What of the other 29? Junk. Mm-hmm. Just pure junk. Junk that software ought to be able to take care of, frankly. Okay, we're focusing on the 60%, and we're helping them increase their revenues by getting them into rooms when they couldn't otherwise.
Yep.
By way of example, one of our very important partnerships is with Medtronic Neurovascular. Largest neurovascular business and the largest medtech company in the world. We have an exclusive partnership to put our units in. Just a very quick summary. We put hardware in rooms that allows people to video themselves in, bring themselves in remotely, and see everything in the room. They can control cameras and see images that are necessary during the procedure. I'll stop there, it'll get too clinical. But that basic notion is fully solved in.
Yeah.
There are skeptics. Those folks who've been in the business forever, I'm not doing this remote thing. I don't trust this thing. We had one of those. Well, one of those just covered a case at 7 o'clock in the morning that he couldn't have otherwise covered because he was somewhere else. They'd have lost business. $20,000 or so of business, which in the medtech space, that's a big case. That's an important case. It's a meaningful chunk of revenues. And they wouldn't have supported that physician, which wouldn't have gone too well because that physician needed him, right? That's what Avail's all about. So we're kind of taking care of that 60%. The 11% is spent selling. I hope you guys can figure out how to do the 29.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's just too much time spent.
Right.
Inventory tracking's on paper, barcodes. It's just a bunch of silliness that, to me, software ought to be able to solve.
Yeah.
The prospecting process is very, very complicated, and it gets more complicated because of the IDN. Excuse me. It also gets complicated because if you're selling cardiovascular products and you're part of a large company that also has something in orthopedics and something else in general surgery, that whole bundle is sold at the corporate level.
Yep.
So you might be trying to sell a widget at X dollars per unit, but at the corporate level, they're selling it at X minus, and you can't control it as part of your process. Right? Because you're just that sales rep down at the street level.
Right.
I used the word just, I shouldn't have. That's what your function is. That's at that level. But at the corporate level, there are deals getting cut that impact what you have to do every day, right? So that complexity adds into it also.
Something that we have done, that Clary is focused on for technology companies, is standardizing the process, standardizing the sales process and governing that process. The way that you two are describing the sales process for HCLS, it seems like it's never one size fits all, but it seems like there are certain ways that you could streamline things, create more of a repeatable process out of it. So Omar, over to you. Where do you see the opportunities to add a bit more governance, add a bit more standardization to the sales process?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the sake of using our imaginations, imagine a world where a lot of companies are using, let's say, Avail. So that 60% time that the rep is usually driving around, let's just say it gets cut down to, 10%, 20%. So they have, 50% more time back, right? At the end of the day, when these companies, they put certain business roles, we want to do 10 million in revenue this quarter. And to get to that 10 million, we have these objectives, X amount of meetings, et cetera. The only thing the rep actually controls is their daily and weekly activity. That's it. So that percentage of time that they just got back, these reps don't know what to do with it, right? And so I think, when it comes to processes, when it comes to revenue and collaboration across the organization, just because the rep has time doesn't mean they want to spend it manually entering things into Salesforce. But then on top of it, a lot of that stuff needs to be automated. It just has to. Even if you're very good about data entry, human bias is there for a reason. And for one rep, that's okay one time, but then that stuff compounds over time. And now your projections are way off. And this is why the board gets really pissed every quarter, because it's they don't know what to expect. Every board meeting is what surprise is going to happen. And so I feel like with that time, you introduce software and technology to essentially automate these processes, automate the activity. And that way the rep, who, for me, I look at sales reps, especially in our industry, like athletes, they want to get better. And so you have to give them the right activities that are objectively measured to give them the guidance as to where should they focus and how should they focus. If you do this right over time, right, I hope after a year, revenue becomes a true process where you can actually predict when something's going to close and then look at a board and say, you know what, this deal has been there for X amount of time with this little touch point. We have to put more effort there. Too many times, especially in the world of capital equipment, like robots, things that are really expensive, essentially. When you have deals, when I used to run deals, having 2 deals to run, there's so many people to deal with. Most reps have more than 2 deals, right? They have to have 5 or 8 or 10. There's no way on planet Earth somebody can manage that in their head. It's just impossible. So you need software to create this process to tell you, these are the activities you should be focusing on. These are the accounts that are at risk. Here's where we should put our attention. This is where we should put resources. And this also helps with marketing, because marketing has a budget and they don't know where to spend it. Sales just comes and says, we need this or that, right? And then that becomes this, friction with marketing, because sales is being subjective, very emotional. They don't have data to guide them. And then marketing, let's say, spends money on certain events in one place when it should have gone somewhere else.
You're seeing something similar, Daniel? Well, actually, my question for you is more about, we're introducing these new technologies. You're bringing the virtual experience into the operating room. That's what Avail is doing in large part. Omar's talking about ways that we can automate data capture and relieve some of that manual data entry burden. Are you seeing resistance from sellers to that kind of pretty radical change?
Yeah, I would say the resistance is the lack of familiarity and the comfort with the status quo. So what we find at Avail is there's, as true with any new concept, there are early adopters. Then there's the late earlies, right, that start to smell their way into the kitchen and want to start eating a little bit. Then there are the folks that just plain need to hands-on several times before I'm gonna. That rep I described in that particular category a moment ago was a non-believer. Great performer. One of those folks that just somehow gets all that stuff done that I described. But late adopter from the mindset of it. And after one experience, she said, wow, you know what, that was great. Not sold yet, right? Still needed a little more. Got another one. Oh, well, that's pretty good too. And we're starting to chip our way into it.
Right.
There is my status quo has worked for me my entire career mindset that I think needs to get broken, candidly. So I do see some resistance in that manner. The other thing that's true in medtech, because of what Omar said a little while ago of I'm going to hang out in the washroom or I'm going to hang out in the surgeon's lounge, the in-person matters a lot to folks.
Yes.
Okay. So for Avail, we run into that you're not in person if you're remote, definitionally. So what happens when my competition is in person and I'm remote? So lots of people have challenges getting over that notion. But if you're remote, you're actually in there, you're just on the screen. That's how we describe that. And we get folks over that problem. I want to touch back on something you said before because I don't want to lose a point. You had asked, is there a way where there's some standardization that could happen? The answer to me is yes. ASCs need to be managed a certain way because of the lower volume procedures per site of service. That's what we call it in the industry, is site of service. One ASC is a site of service, a hospital is a site of service. Because of the low relative volume of the site of service and the lower selling price for the same part number there versus an acute care hospital that we're all familiar with, that should be sold differently. You can't bring the cost structure from selling Stanford to a joint location, joint replacement location down the street that does 100 procedures a year. You can't bring that cost structure there because you'll lose money. So there has to be some other way of managing that. Not only from the standpoint of support, which is what we do, but from the standpoint of sales process. There has to be another way. And that's an entity that should have some formulaic things that can be built around it software-wise. My head, right? So that should be there. Capital equipment's another one. That's very, very different from widgets that are used one time. The selling process is entirely different, right? And there's some folks actually from my team right here who have experience in selling capital. And there is a methodical process, multi-layered. It requires lots of management. And right now, it's not necessarily done in the best way from an automation standpoint. Selling to an individual hospital or a small group of hospitals, totally different than selling to Common Spirit or HCA, the two largest hospital chains in the country. There are different people that service those. There are street level folks, and then there's what are called corporate accounts. That interaction is a wholly different way of selling. That's a model. So my point being that there are a couple of different types of categories that can help. But on the discouraging side, I'm familiar with a very large med tech that has Salesforce. In, I'm going to say 90% of their divisions, it's used in about 30% of their divisions. Brutal. They paid for it. They have on-staff people trying to integrate. And they're just not getting the traction as they want.
So why is that, Omar? Is it the what's in it for me just isn't there for the
Yeah,
reps?
no, 100%. Because if you think about it, like from a rep's perspective, it's like, okay, I only have so much time in the day. Even if it's a capital rep, they're not in cases. But if they have so much time in the day and what you're being judged on is your ability to put deals in pipeline and close, and CRM is essentially, and the marketers get pissed when I say this, but essentially it's a tool for marketing to see what you're doing. So it's like, okay, if I don't close a deal or get anything in pipeline and show activity, I'm gonna lose my job. If I don't get things into the CRM and data-wise, like I'm gonna get yelled at by marketing, my VP's gonna have a conversation with me, and then like an associate's gonna just do it for me. So I'm just not gonna do that, right? And I think probably because the big thing is the value's not there. And again, we've talked about this, like, there's a sales, I forget, a salesman who we always say like selling is not an event, it's a process. But I think in this case, when you make revenue a process, right, it becomes more objective. When it becomes an event, it's a subjective thing that everybody gets together on once a quarter. They look at a board and they start debating what should be done, and it's being triaged. So it's like, oh, we got to close this deal, and like we're having these issues. So the marketing tries to triage and throw money at it. Versus when it actually gets broken up through as a process, which only happens when you automate the data entry and you have clean data, then everybody across the organization, not just sales, but sales, marketing, clinical, and customer success, can objectively look at the process and say, hey, how do we manage each one of these variables and what levers do we have to pull it when?
Yep.
Right? And that's a much easier way to do things, and it's a scalable way.
Yep.
I think that the big thing that our industry is facing around it and across the board is that COVID changed a lot of things and it exposed a lot of weaknesses in our industry. Yeah. And now we've kind of realized that, hey, this business model of medtech, the way we've run it for decades, it's no longer functional. It's no longer scalable. It doesn't fit anymore. So how do we adapt and change that? So again, like going from that event in a physician's lounge or at a conference where you sell to more of a process. Yep. Whether it's like a little widget or a piece of capital equipment, it's all become a large, more collaborative process, and it's more complicated.
So we're talking a lot about how we can streamline the sales rep experience. We can drive more efficiency, more predictability at the board level, at the executive level. Mm-hmm. What about the patients? What's in it for them? How do these advances and how do this adoption of digital sales technology, how is it better for
It's a great question.
people that are on the outside?
I've got a very, very deep opinion that all of this logistical stuff we're taking care of at Avail and all of the process things that we don't take care of, but I know you guys are going after, hurts patients because it keeps sales reps out of the room. And just fundamentally, you can't help a patient if you're driving, right? I mean, you just can't do that. You can't help a patient if you're banging out a spreadsheet.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And, I've been in the industry a really, really long time. I've seen literally thousands of procedures across every specialty you can possibly think of. I've seen sales reps make some recommendations to physicians about device choice that have benefited the patient on the table in ways that have gone from better outcome to saving a life. I've been in those rooms. I've watched it happen dozens of times. What if that rep wasn't there that day?
Yep.
If he or she were driving or he or she were in her home office working on some spreadsheet because the stuff's not collected for them in a more cost or a time-saving way. That's insane.
Yep.
And I think every one of us would agree that for ourselves, for our family members, just telling you want the rep in the room.
Yeah.
Be it virtually, be it in person, whatever you want that rep available because they're knockout great at what they do. If they can't be in the room because of some stuff that can be managed by software or some stuff that can be managed by hardware and software in our case, so they don't need to drive so much, it's kind of a problem.
Yeah.
Now, to be clear, there are loads of procedures where they're frankly not needed in the room, and they're there anyway because they're trying to keep relationship. They're not needed in the room because clinically it's a straightforward procedure, the technology's straightforward, the procedure's straightforward. There's no need for them really, really to be there except for when they are needed. Right. And the problem is you don't know between patient 1 and patient 2 on the same day who have the exact same procedure whether or not you'll be needed. So as a rep, you're caring for that customer, that surgeon, that interventionalist, and whether or not he or she needs you in a moment. If they turn around and you're not there, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the mindset that the reps go through. And in some respects, I feel for them because the industry has not evolved with tools to help them have more time to service their customers. I'd be interested in that same survey I described that yielded 11% selling, what it was when I started in my career. I'm going to guess it was more like 40.
Wow.
35 or 40.
Wow.
I'm going to guess. It's my gut.
Yeah.
Right? That's just not right.
Yeah.
So we have to solve it.
Literally saving lives. This is what's
Literally
at stake here. And,
literally.
Omar, anything to add to that same question? Let's put on the patient lens and talk about benefits for them.
Yeah, and just so people understand why is Daniel saying that you want the rep in the room is that surgery has gotten it gets infinitely more complicated over the years because new technologies get introduced. Things that used to be commonplace, like it's common for a patient to have this kind of infection, et cetera. It's no longer you don't have to have that anymore. But when you introduce all these new technologies and ways of managing a patient, no doctor can manage all that. And so a lot of these reps, and I worked for a company like this. We became hyperized specialists. We almost went through medical school practically to understand one specific area of the procedure, every way that it can be better, going wrong, et cetera. And there, of course, like in any industry, because someone might, someone once said is like, oh, well, what if the rep's trying to make quota? They're going to recommend their product. There's always a rep like that, but the majority of our industry, and I've worked with a lot of reps, maybe not thousands, but definitely in the hundreds of them, will oftentimes recommend a competitor over theirs just to make sure that, I'll give you a great example. I don't want to mention her name, but there's a young lady out of South Carolina. Her company's product got recalled, okay? So she's not gonna make quota. That week, and I talked to her on the phone, she spent the entire week taking her competitor into every one of her accounts and introducing them to make sure that that competitor's product was used instead, right? And so again, like, I think that the more we're able to automate these processes, because again, these things aren't gonna go away. Like the complexity of selling into an IDN, let alone even like a standalone hospital, which by the way, there's very few of those these days, aren't going away. How do we make it so that all these things are automated, data is captured, and the rep is able to focus on the most important thing, which is growing the business, driving recurring revenue, and then more importantly, helping patients at the end of the day. And I think like something like Clary, aside from closing deals, where it could really help is that once a product is in, it's very hard to predict our recurring revenue, which is like the reuse of the product. So how do you get the right data and understand, oh, you know what? We need to give more attention to this account over that account. This is how we can allocate budget. And the whole thing becomes a much better process versus this thing where it's like once a quarter sales and marketing gets together and then they like, go head to head on it. And it's just a mess. Like it really, really is a mess. It doesn't help anyone. At the end of the day, the people that end up suffering as a result of it is usually patients because they don't get the technologies that they want. And I want to add like one other thing just so people understand this. The reason why this happens this way is that medicine and physicians as a whole are much followers. Like if you decide to do something new and innovative, it's very dangerous. You might kill someone. So it takes a lot for a physician to adopt a new product. So a lot of times the greatest innovations you're seeing being used, robotics, AI, et cetera, it's because a sales rep understood the problem so well that they were able to have an academic discussion with a physician and convince them that this is the best thing for the patient, and that's when the physician converts.
Yeah, let me tag on to that with a comment that I think we're facing in healthcare. We face in healthcare probably more than otherwise outside of healthcare, and that's structural resistance to change behavior. Because we're in an industry where we care for patients every day, when somebody's on the table and you see a certain anatomy on the screen, if it's like angioplasty for the heart or something, you have your go-tos. There's a list. And then there's this new widget. Kind of go, not today. And you put it to the side. Well, the reps they got to make their quota. They're talking, they're trying, and they're trying to convince to the point Omar made. That's structural in that piece of the business. Now I'm going to back it out and talk about sales process for just a second. I always knew intellectually that digital tools are only as useful as the behavior they can change. Right. I always knew that intellectually. Yep. Starting Avail, what I came to understand is that we are a hardware and software company, yes, 100%. We're changing behavior across an industry. And we're structurally changing behavior. And I will say that COVID put an attention on the notion of remote. It didn't change behavior. It changed awareness. Sure. Okay. The first, right? I mean, you don't know you have a problem. You can't solve your problem until you admit you have a problem. Yep. So the industry admitted they have a problem, and then years and years and years went on. And it's inappropriate for you to mention the name of the individual who said what I'm getting ready to suggest. Equally inappropriate to name the company or the setting. But in a recent investor setting, one of the CEOs of a top 3 medtech company commented that operational efficiencies from this point forward will include remote procedure support. That's a change that we at Avail and the folks who were sitting in those chairs right there from my team made happen. Yeah. That was not a minute. That's hard to do in this industry, right? So I would submit a challenge of behavioral change through technology of course, I've only been in this industry, but I'm going to say it's probably a little harder than in some other industries because of the nature of what we do every day. I will also submit that once the behavior's changed, you've got the positive side of that. Good luck on seeding that behavior. right? So you might invest your way into changing that behavior, but once you're locked, standards are hard to break.
Right.
Super hard to break in this industry. And as somebody who's been involved in multiple change events, robotics, my last company in angioplasty, was that thing that somebody looked at and said, wait, what are you talking about? It's now a standard of care. And now Avail, I can just tell you that the stickiness on the other side of that fence is phenomenal.
Love to hear that.
Yeah.
Omar, Daniel, thank you so much. This has been
Certainly.
really fantastic. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for enjoying another epic episode of the State of MedTech. If you're feeling inspired and love this episode, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn notifications on so you never miss an episode. And be sure to give us 5 stars and write a short review because that helps more people discover this amazing community of ours. If you're a company who has a executive that you'd like to be on the show, or perhaps you want to sponsor one of the episodes, shoot us an email at hello@khateebandco.com. Take care, and we'll see you next time.